Hello guys, this is my second video on how to choose photography gear as a hobbyist. So I hope this video will help you in a number of ways. For one, if you have decided to jump ship into this interchangeable lenses business, I want to help you choose your camera and your lenses, choose your gear, and also I want to help you avoid gear lust, which is very common among hobbyists. You gather a lot of lenses and camera and they gather dust because you never use them. Okay, so first let's recap a little bit. The phone versus camera. So I mentioned in my previous video, a cell phone can take great photos under good lighting, but under poor lighting it is not as good as a like full frame camera. Also, it is difficult to produce the blurry background, but I think these are minor things. Your phone should be your first camera to invest in. Even if you decide to buy a top-notch camera, you should always first buy a good phone with a good camera phones, because it is a camera wherever you take you take with you. The photography, the key is capturing the moment. It's not about getting the perfect image. Capturing the moment is much more important. Something's happening and you don't have any camera, you would grab your phone and take the video, take the photo. No problem, no doubt. For interchangeable lenses camera, even if you go for micro four third with the lens attached, the camera will still be too large. You will not carry that micro four third with you wherever you go. So most likely, as an average guy, you will not carry any camera with you most of the time. Only if you know you're going to take some photos, you will carry your camera with you. So your phone is your best camera because it is always there and it allows you to capture the moment. So that's the best camera. Invest in a good phone, the first step. Now, after you get a good phone, the camera you want to get, there are a lot of choices. It's very confusing. So there are different ecosystems, brands like Nikon, Canon, Sony. I would recommend any of these because they offer good full-frame cameras. I know Pentax is offering full-frame and Panasonic may go full-frame. I have never used those, but I have used Canon 5D Mark II, Nikon D810, Nikon D600, and also Sony a7 II. They're all great cameras. I would recommend Sony because their mirrorless camera is really good. Now let's talk about a mirrorless camera versus DSLR. I have never used Nikon and Canon mirrorless cameras, so you may also go for Nikon and Canon mirrorless cameras, but Sony is absolutely good. A7 II is great. Why I would recommend mirrorless cameras? Because it's so much easier to use. It's so much easier to use. The image is already on the sensor. It's electronic image. It's no longer like an image reflected by lenses, by your mirror and prism. Because the image are already on the sensor, you can do a lot of stuff. Like you will be able to see the exposure right away, and you can do the eye focusing very accurately. Because it's an electronic image, you can do all kinds of analysis. Another nice thing is the zooming in. Because it's electronic image, if you want to nail focus, you can just press the shutter release halfway, it will engage autofocus. Then you can start to turn the manual focus ring. It will detach the autofocus and allow you to use manual focus, and it will automatically zoom in. Because it's image on the sensor, it can zoom in 10 times. You can nail focus 100% of the time. So if you use manual focus, by all means go for mirrorless because it allows you to nail focus 100% of the time. No need for like focus peaking, no need for some equipment, split screen, all the kind of stuff, no need. Just mirrorless camera, you can nail manual focus 100% of the time. It's so much easier to operate. Like the autofocus mode, the Sony camera has just 4 different modes. Full manual, autofocus and manual override, autofocus single shot, autofocus continuous shot. The autofocus single shot allows you to do the eye focusing thing, which is convenient. Press the one button at the back, it automatically focuses on the eye. So it's so easy to use. For a new user, definitely mirrorless camera, even though most of the photos I took is with my Nikon DSLR, Nikon D810. I personally recommend mirrorless. Now let's talk about advantage of DSLR. I mentioned I strongly recommend a mirrorless camera, but I personally use DSLR. Why? It offers some small benefits like the battery life is much longer because you're looking through an optic viewfinder. It doesn't cost any energy to reflect some lights. Like you're looking into a mirror, it doesn't cost any energy. It's lights are reflected. Now, the DSLR single biggest advantage is the optic viewfinder. It's optic viewfinder, so you cannot zoom in or zoom out. You can put some eyepieces on to magnify it like 20%, but usually it's not very useful. The biggest difference of the optic viewfinder is that there's no limit on dynamic range. There's no limit on pixels. It's just like you're watching TV, it's 4K TV, it's high resolution. Hey, the resolution outside of a window is much better. You look at natural lights, there's no TV at all. So the DSLR viewfinder, optic viewfinder, is just a mirror, an image reflected by a mirror. So there's no limit to the pixel count, the resolution. It's much more realistic, and I personally like it very much. But again, I wouldn't mind using the electronic viewfinder. I think it offers a huge advantage to new users, to some people new to photography. The mirror is so much easier to operate. You can zoom in, zoom out, because it's an electronic image, not just a reflected image. So the convenience offered by electronic viewfinder outweighs the benefit of natural light from optical viewfinder. That's my 2 cents. Of course, you can attach a loop, which is a device, to the back of your DSLR's LCD screen. That will serve as an electronic viewfinder, but that thing is huge. If you attach that thing to the back of a camera and go out to take pictures or videos, people would think you are very weird. They don't know what the heck that thing is. So should you use a loop? I mean, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. Just go for mirrorless, I would say, because the electronic viewfinder is built in, so it's save you the hassle of attaching a loop and make your camera look like a monster. Yeah. Now, how big do you want a sensor to be? Full frame, micro four third versus APS-C. The full frame is 4 times as large as micro four third, which is APS-C is slightly larger than micro four third. The Nikon is and Canon have different factors, 1.6, 1.5. I would recommend full frame because full frame offers the largest sensor, so it can produce the image with a blurry background much better, much easier. The kind of 3D effect. Also, image quality is better. The difference between full frame and micro four third, depending on the model, is actually pretty big. Like my Nikon D810 versus Olympus OM-D-M10, the sensor quality is very different. Even if I just use my kit lens, the Nikon 24-120 f4 lens, and that D810 full frame will still trump micro four third from Olympus, because the sensor on the Olympus does not produce very nice micro contrast compared to the Nikon. So the color looks much more natural on the Nikon because the better sensor. So my recommendation would be to go for a camera with a good sensor, in particular full frame, if you don't mind the extra cost and weight. You may read some of the technical specs of the sensor, like color depth, dynamic range. Color depth, the more color you to represent it, the better, especially for portraiture, right? Dynamic range, landscape, you have sky very bright, you have some dark valleys and stuff. The broader the dynamic range, the better. It will capture much more information. The Sony and the Nikon sensors are very good at this. A pixel count, I think for family use, unless you're making commercial-sized prints, for family use, like 20 million pixels should be more than enough. Most full frame should offer at least 20 million pixels, or at least 16 million. 16 megapixels, I think some of the cameras use it. Full frame use that. Now, autofocus points, the more the better, of course. You want to trace moving subjects. Your daughter, your sons are running around. You want to trace their movement. The more autofocus, especially for DSLR, the more cross-type autofocus, the better. Now, ergonomics, of course, you want to find a camera that fits in your hand. The micro four third camera, with all the controls crammed together, is not very easy to use. For average guy and a lady with a big hands like my wife, she has huge hands. The Sony A7 II, in her hands, she was holding it in her fingertips. Yeah, it's kind of silly. But anyway, you will want a big enough camera. Sometimes you may even want to invest in the battery grip to make it larger, to improve the ergonomics. So there are a bunch of other features I'd like to talk about, like the foldable LCD screen. I think is very important because when you make videos, you may shoot the video not from eye level. You may want to pull out the LCD screen face up so you can lower your camera and shoot videos of your little child. Or you may also want to shoot from different angles. So the foldable LCD screen is very useful. Nikon D810 doesn't have it, but newer models all have this foldable screen. Can pull it out and change the angle. Yeah, it's very useful. Wi-Fi, definitely get a camera with Wi-Fi, or at least you can attach some Wi-Fi device. When I take photos for my family, I would carry a tripod, put my Nikon D810 on the tripod, remotely control my camera with my cell phone, focus on my eye, press shutter release. So I don't need anybody to help to take a family portrait. It's very good, being able to control a camera remotely. GPS is nice to have. I think a lot of cameras should have this one. Every photo is geotagged. You know exactly longitude, latitude, where you took the photo. I think it's nice to have. eye focus. This is very nice to have, especially for the mirrorless camera, because the image is already on the sensor. It can analyze the image, detect where the eyes are. Like Sony A7, you press the button at the back, round button, depending how you program the buttons, of course. Press the button, it will automatically trace out the eye and focus on the eye. It's very convenient. So I have highlighted the features I think are really nice to have. So to summarize, I would recommend a full-frame mirrorless camera like Sony A7 series, and I would recommend the foldable LCD screen, Wi-Fi, and eye focus, because these features are really nice. And unless you really like this optical viewfinder, you like natural lights over the LCD screen or a electronic viewfinder, you should stick with the mirrorless because it's so much easier to operate, especially if you use manual focus or use manual focus lenses. Mirrorless allows you to manual focus accurately 100% of the time without having to attach some loop to the back of your DSLR, which makes your camera look silly. So that's my opinion on camera choice. Now let's talk about lenses. Prime lenses versus zoom lenses. Of course, the zooms offer more flexibility in terms of zoom range, but I strongly recommend prime lenses because a prime lenses is more versatile. First, low light. Under low light, a prime lens shines because it has much larger aperture. It gathers much more light. Second, a prime lens is much lightweight. You can take it anywhere, and with mirrorless camera, every prime lens will get their image stabilization. And because of lightweight, you have a much more compact setup. The third benefit is image quality. Prime lenses are generally sharper than zoom lens with very little distortion. If you use a zoom lens, chances are you will have to do the post. If you shoot a RAW, you will have to do the post editing to use some lens correction to correct the distortion, like barrel distortion. The straight line got to bend out. The pincushion distortion at the telephoto end, your straight line bend in. So this prime lens usually have very little distortion. You don't have to correct. There are exceptions, like the Nikon's 50mm f1.8G. There's some distortion, not too much less distortion than the zoom lens, but you may want to correct the distortion in your post processing. But most prime lenses, especially standard 50mm lens and telephoto lens, there's no distortion. So it saves you a lot of hassle as a hobbyist to correct distortion in post processing. So the prime lens is really versatile because it handles very well, it shines under low light, and it produces better image quality with less work after you have taken the photos in post-processing. Now, zoom lens is also very useful if you know some situations you just can't use prime lens, like you want to step forward to zoom with your feet, but hey, what if there's a pot of water in front of you? So the zoom lens allows you to zoom in, zoom out without moving. It's very convenient. So the kit lens, you can get the kit lens. I have one, Nikon's 24-120 f4, which is gathering dust, almost never use. The half or more than half of my photos are taken with a single zoom lens, which is 70-200 f2.8, because I mostly take portraits of my family, and that lens really shines. Very sharp, very versatile, fast autofocus, and I can capture photos of my daughter who is running around without having to move my feet. If it's a prime lens, I will not be able to catch up with my daughter because she's moving so fast. But with a zoom lens, I can get close to her and then zoom in and still be able to frame my shots. It's very convenient. But I wouldn't recommend that 70-200 f2.8 to anybody because my whole setup, Nikon D810 with that lens and battery grip, weighs exactly 10 pounds. It's too heavy. Give you some perspective, the 1 gallon of milk is 8.6 pounds. 10 pounds is very heavy. Now, max aperture, of course, the larger the better. You want the blurry background for portraiture. Optic quality, sharpness, of course, the 50mm f1.8 lens is sharp enough. Most of prime lenses should be sharp enough for you, and some zoom lens should also be sharp enough for you. Of course, the sharper the better, but for a hobbyist, after a certain level, the extra sharpness doesn't really matter that much. Autofocus versus manual focus lenses. Of course, autofocus saves you so much hassle. Even if you're gonna take a portraiture you want to manual focus in the end, you can still autofocus first, then fine-tune it. Saves you so much time. I can't think of a manual focus lens that there's no autofocus substitute. Of course, autofocus lenses cost more, but you should stick as a hobbyist, stick to autofocus to save you the hassle. I own only two manual focus lenses. One is the vintage Nikon AI 200mm f4 because it's so small, so compact. If I'm on travel, the Yellowstone somewhere, I know I'm going to take photos of some wildlife. That lens can be taken with me with very little extra weight, so lightweight. Another manual focus lens I own is the Rokinon 135 f2. It's a fantastic portrait lens with a mirrorless camera, the Sony a7 II. You can nail focus 100% of the time. You can get ridiculously sharp image. But I rarely use it because of the 7200 f2.8. You lose a little bit of sharpness. You carry a much heavier lens, but you can capture the moment much better because autofocus lenses can trace movement while track movement. While manual focus lenses, it's very difficult. You have to pre-focus. Like my daughter's running, I know she's going to hit that spot. I will pre-focus on that spot with the focus highlighting, focus peaking. So that area is highlighted in yellow. Whenever my daughter hit that yellow area, I press the shutter release so I can get some photos in focus. But it's hit or miss. It's not very convenient. So by all means, stick to autofocus lens unless you want to play with manual focus lenses for fun or collecting those vintage lenses. Now, image stabilization, I think it's very useful under low lighting. With the good lighting, you use the fast prime lens. This is not useful at all. It's not, you're shooting like 500th of a second. So with or without image stabilization, you will get sharp images. But in the early in the morning, late in the afternoon or evening, indoors, when there's not enough light, image stabilization can produce much better images. So also for video, it's a must because without image stabilization, your video will look choppy. As you move around, your hand will shake, and the video will not look very nice. So definitely go get an image stabilization lens for videography. I use a 35mm Tamron f1.8 in an image stabilized lens for video most of the time. It's great. And your kit lens have stabilization. You can use that for video as well. For mirrorless cameras, you have on-sensor image stabilization. So mirrorless camera is generally better for videography than the DSLR. Size and weight, as I mentioned, yeah, keep in mind if you get a very big ass heavy lens, you probably won't take it anywhere because it's so heavy. Like the 7200 f2.8, which I use most of the time, I only take it on short trips, like 2-mile, 3-mile hike, largely flat. Now, vintage lenses, as I mentioned, they're not as sharp as modern lenses because technology is advancing. They have good build quality, but they won't have good coating, a good design, so the image quality will not be as good. So generally, I would advise you to avoid vintage lenses. But they do produce some special effects, yeah. Sometimes sharpness is not everything, yeah. So you can buy a few vintage lenses as a hobby. With a mirrorless camera, you can nail focus 100% of the time, so why not? So my recommended lenses, your first choice should always be 50mm f1.8. So lightweight, so sharp, easy to take with you. Yeah, this was best lens, yeah, because of its lightweight and very useful focal length. So kit lens or 35mm 1.8 with stabilization for videography, and for portraiture 85mm f1.8, or if you don't mind carrying extra weight, that 7200 f2.8 is a beast because it allows you to zoom in, zoom out. You become very flexible in framing your shot. So some other accessories. Like flash, reflector, tripod, monopod, battery grip, and loop and stuff. So flash, I never use the flash, so it's completely optional. Don't shoot a photo if it's too dark. Because we're hobbyists, we're not shooting wedding or anything. We can choose where we shoot the photo. Reflector. This photographic reflector is very lightweight. If you have an assistant, it will dramatically improve your portrait because you can reflect light onto your subject. So this is highly recommended. It costs very little, like 15-20 bucks. Tripod, definitely. Like you take a home portraiture, a family portraiture with your DSLR, remotely controlled DSLR mirrorless cameras. The tripod is very useful. Monopod, optional. If you are shooting some long video with the heavy lenses, the soccer game, then the monopod will help you support the camera and lenses, so you don't have the arm fatigue. Battery grip. Well, this is completely optional. If you're shooting portraiture, you always shoot vertical, then this battery grip will help you with the ergonomics because you have extra shutter release and you can still use your both hands to hold the camera very comfortably. It's completely optional. Loop, this is for DSLRs. Yeah, you don't have electronic viewfinder. You want to use your LCD screen as an electronic viewfinder. You want to nail manual focus. Well, the first place, why not just go buy a mirrorless camera instead of using DSLR? If you do use DSLR and you want to use the LCD screen as an electronic viewfinder, this is very helpful. Again, as I mentioned, your camera will look very silly with the loop attached. Okay, so that's my talk. Thank you.